Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And today we're still in Acts. We're going to be in Acts 21, verses 26 through 36. And today we're going to look at Paul being arrested. He is arrested, and this is, if you've been following along with us, this was something that was told and foretold through the Holy Spirit that was going to happen. But obviously Paul knew this, and so he continued anyways. And so we're going to look at it in about 10, 11 short verses that we'll look at here, and then we'll look at some of our notes. It says, So Paul went to the temple the next day with the other men. They had already started the purification ritual, so he publicly announced the date when their vows would end and sacrifices would be offered for each of them. Then the 7 days were almost ended when some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul in the temple and roused a mob against him. They grabbed him, yelling, Men of Israel, help us. This is the man who preaches against our people everywhere and tells everybody to disobey the Jewish laws. He speaks against the temple and even defiles this holy place by bringing in Gentiles. For earlier that day they had seen him in the city with Trophimus, I think is how you say that, a Gentile from Ephesus, and they assumed Paul had taken him into the temple. The whole city was rocked by these accusations, and a great riot followed. Paul was grabbed and dragged out of the temple, and immediately the gates were closed behind him. As they were trying to kill him, word reached the commander of the Roman regiment that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. He immediately called out his soldiers and officers and ran down among the crowd. When the mob saw the commander and the troops coming, they stopped beating Paul. Then the commander arrested him and ordered him bound with 2 chains. He asked the crowd who he was and what he had done. Some shouted one thing and some another. Since he couldn't find out the truth in all the uproar and confusion, he ordered that Paul be taken to the fortress. As Paul reached the stairs, the mob grew so violent the soldiers had to lift him to their shoulders to protect him, and the crowd followed behind, shouting, Kill him! Kill him! So, obviously, a very violent response to Paul. And so we see like Paul's arrested. But more than anything, I think Paul was arrested here for his own safety. But at the same time, I mean, the commander saw, okay, these people were coming after Paul for whatever reason he didn't know, and so he was like, the best thing he could do is just arrest this man and get him out of here, because I mean, obviously this was the last thing. This was a very serious thing. The Romans, the people in charge, especially on the Roman side in charge of stuff, riots like this were not tolerated, and you did not want the full force of Rome coming down. And so we see here that the concern of the Christian leaders that we read about before was well based, right? That the things that they saw speaking through the Holy Spirit, even this last chapter, right? And so, um, we see that their vows were almost completed, and so some Jews from the province of Asia raised a mob against Paul with false charges, and they assumed this was an assumption of theirs, but they were intent on killing Paul. But luckily, the Roman commander came and rescued him. And so we see this. This is similar to the response to Jesus, and how I'm almost more violent than what they were to Jesus. But the Pharisees, the Jews, the religious leaders, they were just bound and determined to murder people. And this is the interesting thing, is they were so religiously fanatic about the Jewish laws that they were willing to obey it. It was okay to disobey their own laws in order to kill this man, or to make sure that their side, or to protect their certain religion. And honestly, we see this today in the church. Maybe, hopefully, not to this degree, but we see where people will justify immoral and corrupt behavior to protect what they think is protecting the church, or they justify their immoral behavior to do the right thing, and stuff like that. And so it's unfortunate, but this is part of human nature. And then we have the mob mentality, where they were able to stir up a mob. The mob had no clue what in the world was going on, but they were just following. Most of them had no clue what was going on, but they were following along. And so what the the Jews from the province of Asia said was that Paul had brought a Gentile, or the literal term was a Greek, um, into the temple, right? And it was a crime punishable by death to bring any non-Jew into the temple. Um, the temple precincts, let me put it that way, beyond what they called the court of the Gentiles. There was an area they were able to come up to. And so they just assumed that Paul had violated this by bringing this guy into there, just because they had seen him with the guy in the city the day before. And so they probably knew he didn't, but they were just saying, hey, look, they were trying to use this as an excuse to do that. And so to do this was a great desecration of the temple. And so this accusation obviously aroused the fury of the Jewish populace, because Paul was, they already hated Paul, and they already were out against Paul, and they already thought all these things about Paul. And so the fact that they thought he had done this, right, and then they had convinced these other people that did, would have really set him off. And so they closed the temple gates, and because they thought it had been defiled by a Gentile. And so this would have been a normal procedure. They would have closed the temple gates after they removed Paul from it, and then there would have been a purification, cleansing process to go through there. Um, but we have this fortress. And so the one thing you got to remember, if you've ever studied the Temple Mount, it was a large flat surface on the top, and the temple was in the part of it, and then there was these other there areas all around it, to like little side sections and gates and walkways and other areas you could stay in, like housing and all that stuff. Um, on the Temple Mount, and so it was more than just the temple up there. There was a lot of other stuff, and so there was a fortress up there, and there was a large military garrison. This was actually built. It was the fortress of Antonia, I think is how you say it. Um, and it was built by Herod the Great, and it was on the northwest corner of the Temple Mount. And so this accommodated the Roman cohort that was stationed there to keep the peace. And so it wasn't like they were like all the way down the city. They were up there in that whole temple area, but they had to come all the way to from that one side all the way over to get to Paul before they came. So it probably didn't take them a long time to get to him. But that's why they were able to get to him so quickly, is because where they're at. And so again, we see the rest of this as they come in. Obviously, the Jewish people are going to obey the Romans, because you didn't disobey the Romans, because that was death, or certain punishment. And so they come in, they grab Paul, arrest him. And again, to me, it seems like they arrested Paul more for his safety than anything, because he didn't know what was going on. So he went ahead and arrested him and took him back. And we're going to see the conversations that happens after this. But even while that's doing, they're still the mob is still violently acting and calling for them to kill him, and so it's just unreal, the amount of extreme violence we see coming from the Jewish people over an accusation, something they didn't even know if it was true or not. And so, but this is going to help Paul get to where he's wanting to go, and I think that's one of the things we have to remember sometimes, is our path to where we're wanting to go isn't always going to look the way we want it to look sometimes, and God may have other plans. He may get you there eventually, but it may not look the way that you want it to look. And so we're going to continue this story through. And like I said, a lot of these are just short little sections, and like I said, a lot of them are historical. So I try to give as much historical background as I can into some of these things. I can't always get like deep theological thoughts on this, because Acts is there's some theological stuff in there, but really with Acts it's more just historical. It's the Acts of the church. It's the things that happen, and Luke wrote them as they happen, and so that's where a lot of it's just informational for this. And so we're going to be in Acts for a little while, but we'll continue this down. And tomorrow we're going to see Paul speaking to the crowd, and then we'll go through some different things that we'll see with Paul's conversations with those who arrested him and all that. And so, but it's an interesting study with this, and I hope y'all are enjoying it. I hope you're learning from it. As always, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. We do this daily, post these every morning, and that way we can just kind of study the Bible together as we go through it. So, as always, appreciate everyone who takes time to watch, and I hope y'all have a wonderful day.